Right now, in a drawer somewhere near you, there's a lighter. You flick it, a flame appears instantly. You don't think about it. You've probably never once wondered how strange that actually is. You assume humans invented this, that somewhere back in the fog of prehistory, one of your ancestors figured out fire, and every human since has just been improving on that same idea. But the real answer is far stranger. In December 2025, archaeologists working at a site in England called East Farm made a discovery that quietly broke that assumption apart. Buried in the ground for 400,000 years, sitting right next to a burnt hand axe, they found a small fragment of a mineral called pyrite. Pyrite looks like gold. People call it fool's gold. But strike it hard against a piece of flint, and it throws off sparks hot enough to ignite dry material. That's not an accident of nature. That's a tool. A deliberate one. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. 400,000 years ago, your species didn't exist yet. Homo sapiens doesn't show up in the fossil record until roughly 300,000 years ago in Africa. Whoever was striking that pyrite against flint at East Farm wasn't you. It wasn't even close to you. The leading candidates are early Neanderthals, or an older relative species called Homo heidelbergensis. Before this discovery, the oldest solid evidence of deliberate fire-making came from a site in France dated to around 50,000 years ago. For decades, the assumption was simple. Neanderthals living in Europe at that time probably learned this skill from humans, who by then had already spread across the continent and were assumed to be the smarter species. East Farm just erased that assumption by 350,000 years. To understand how big that gap actually is, you have to understand what came before it. The earliest evidence of early humans being around fire goes back almost 1.9 million years at sites in the Turkana Basin in Kenya. But researchers believe this wasn't invention either. It was opportunism. Homo erectus lived in a landscape full of natural wildfires, and at some point learned to use what those fires left behind. That's a completely different skill than making fire. Keeping a flame alive is maintenance. Starting one from nothing, with no instructions, using only rock and plant material, is engineering. For most of the next million years, that gap never closed. Fire was something you found, something you kept alive, not something you made. So why did it finally happen at East Farm? Archaeologist Curtis Marian, who has spent years studying early hunting and survival evidence in South Africa, points to something important. Early humans and their relatives weren't just hunting for meat because it tasted good. Fat and protein may have fueled the exact brain growth that eventually made complex tool use, planning, and fire-making possible in the first place. It's a strange loop. Better food led to a better brain. A better brain led to better tools. And somewhere in that loop, a species that wasn't even us worked out how to strike two rocks together and pull fire out of nothing. Not every researcher is fully convinced the East Farm evidence is airtight. Some want to see it confirmed at more sites before treating the timeline as settled. That caution is normal for a discovery this significant. But even the skeptics agree it's one of the most compelling pieces of fire evidence found in years. Here's the part worth sitting with. If a completely different species figured out fire-making 350,000 years before we existed, independently, with no one to teach them, what does that say about every other invention we've quietly assumed was uniquely ours? Tool use, cooperation, problem-solving under pressure. None of these may be the achievements of a single brilliant species. They may be things intelligence does, whenever it's given enough time and enough pressure to survive, regardless of which species happens to be carrying it. So the next time you flick that lighter in your drawer, you're not just repeating something your ancestors figured out. You're repeating something that may have been figured out more than once, by more than one kind of human, long before your kind ever existed at all.